Wally Amos wasn't just the man behind a cookie brand, he was the brand. For a while, you couldn't escape him. He had this signature look, straw hat, big bow tie, and an even bigger smile. He'd walk into a room with a tray of cookies and leave with everybody talking about him. He wasn't just selling a snack, he was selling joy. Wally had that rare kind of energy that made people stop and pay attention. He knew how to work a crowd, how to tell a story, and how to turn something as simple as a cookie into a full-blown experience. But behind that sweet, warm image was a much heavier truth, one that most people never hear. It's a story about big dreams, blind trust, and what happens when a man builds something beautiful without realizing how fast it can all be taken away. Before he ever thought about baking cookies, Wally Amos was already chasing success. He was born in Tallahassee, Florida, in 1936 and raised mostly by his Aunt Della in New York. She wasn't just his caretaker, she was the one who taught him how to bake. But Wally's first real gift wasn't in the kitchen, it was in recognizing other people's gifts. He served in the Air Force, then went to school with plans to work in entertainment. Eventually, he landed a job at the legendary William Morris Agency, one of the biggest talent agencies in the world. And that's where Wally truly started making waves. He wasn't just a guy behind a desk. He became the first African-American talent agent in the company's history. And he wasn't repping just anyone. He signed Simon and Garfunkel. He worked with Diana Ross. He helped guide Marvin Gaye. He had a knack for connecting with artists, for making people feel seen. That's the kind of presence he had. Disarming, magnetic, impossible to ignore. But the entertainment world is brutal, and by the early 1970s, Wally was starting to feel it. The agency game was political, high pressure, and full of backstabbing. Wally walked away from William Morris without a clear plan. He needed something new, not just another job, but something he could truly call his own. One day, in the middle of all that uncertainty, he remembered the cookies his Aunt Della used to make. Big, rich chocolate chip cookies that felt like comfort in every bite. That memory stuck with him. So he started experimenting, tweaking the recipe, baking for friends, and testing the idea. But Wally didn't just want to sell cookies. He wanted to create a whole experience. He rented a tiny storefront on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, hired a graphic designer to create the branding, and somehow got $25,000 in seed money from Marvin Gaye and Helen Reddy. That's how much people believed in Wally. He wasn't pitching investors in boardrooms, he was calling in favors from pop legends who trusted his vision. When that first Famous Amos cookie store opened in 1975, it exploded. It wasn't just a shop, it was a vibe. Word spread fast. Celebrities showed up. News outlets covered it. People stood in line just to get a taste. The cookies were something special. Big, buttery, packed with chocolate, and baked fresh in-house. They tasted like something homemade, but the packaging made them feel like a luxury item. It was a brand that blended nostalgia with showbiz. And in a city like LA, where presentation is everything, that combination hit hard. People didn't just come for the cookies, they came for Wally. The brand became a cultural moment. Wally was suddenly a national figure. He was on talk shows, in magazine spreads, even making cameo appearances on sitcoms. It wasn't a gimmick, it was genuine. He had built something people loved, and they loved him just as much. His name was the brand. His story was the pitch. His face was right there on the packaging, beaming back at you from grocery shelves. And for a little while, it looked like he had done the impossible. A black entrepreneur with a wildly successful product, adored by celebrities and respected in business circles. He was proof that charisma and passion could take you to the top. But success brought pressure. The demand grew. The company had to scale, fast. Wally was an incredible frontman, but he wasn't a trained businessman. He leaned heavily on advisors and partners, some of whom didn't always have his best interests at heart. To raise money, he brought in investors, but each deal meant giving up a little more ownership. Piece by piece, he lost control. On paper, he was still the founder, but behind the scenes, the power was slipping away. He didn't fully understand the legal documents he was signing. He trusted people to do right by him, and in the world of business, that kind of trust can be dangerous. By 1985, just a decade after he'd launched the brand, Wally Amos was forced out. The board cited a drop in sales and blamed him for not evolving the brand. But most insiders say it was always about control. The investors wanted to take the company in a more corporate direction. They thought Wally's style, his charm, his branding, was too tied to his own personality. They wanted something slicker, more scalable, more generic. So they pushed him out. The man whose face had built the entire company was no longer welcome at the table. And here's where it gets especially cruel. Not only was Wally removed from his own company, he couldn't even use his own name anymore. As part of the deals he'd signed, he'd sold the rights to the name Famous Amos. That meant he couldn't start a new cookie line under that name. He couldn't even use his own face in cookie ads. Think about that. His identity, his likeness, his story, it all legally belonged to someone else. Every time someone picked up a bag of Famous Amos cookies, they were buying a product built on a real person, who no longer had anything to do with it. Wally tried to make a comeback, more than once. He launched Uncle No Name's Cookies, hoping people would recognize the style even without the name. Later, he started Wally Amos Presents, and eventually, the Cookie Kahuna. But none of them ever hit the same way. They were good cookies, but without the name recognition, without the nostalgic pull of Famous Amos, they never gained the same traction. He was a man fighting to get back what had been taken, not just a business, but a legacy. Meanwhile, the Famous Amos brand bounced between corporate owners like a forgotten toy. First the Shansby Group, then President Baking, then Keebler, and eventually Kellogg's. Each company changed the recipe a little more, shifted the branding, shrank the cookie size. Over time, the product lost that original magic. Fans who'd grown up with Wally's original recipe noticed the difference. It wasn't just the taste that had changed. It was the soul, the warmth, the personality, the story. All of that had been stripped away. For younger generations, there was no Wally, just a cookie. But Wally never stopped believing. Even as he aged, even after losing so much, he kept going. He wrote books about his journey. He became a public speaker, focusing on literacy and personal empowerment. He spoke at schools, trying to inspire kids to chase their dreams and to read. He turned his pain into purpose. And even though he couldn't sell his own cookies with his name, he still gave them away, still wore that hat, still smiled, still brought that same energy that made people fall in love with him in the first place. He didn't wallow in bitterness. He focused on what he could do, not what he'd lost. That's what makes his story so powerful. It's not just a story about cookies. It's a story about what happens when you build something beautiful in a system that's built to take. Wally Amos had the heart, the hustle, and the vision, but he didn't have the lawyers. And in business, that can be the difference between being remembered and being erased. His story is a warning about what happens when a man turns himself into a brand, only to realize the brand can be sold out from under him. Today, if you grab a bag of Famous Amos cookies off a grocery shelf, you'll see branding, maybe a slogan, maybe a smiling font, but you won't see Wally. His story's not on the package. His face is gone. And unless someone tells you, you'd never know a real person was ever part of it. The product survived. The man who made it what it was, didn't. That's the part they never put on the label.